this idea about gear. I just think you're a good person to talk about that.
Okay. Okay.
And if you want to tie it in with, because did you work with therapy programs, or were you?
Yeah, we did most of the training for the original program.
Because you were doing trainings for everybody. You were training. I know you're training Aspen people.
Yeah, we did the first courses for Aspen. They'll never admit that. But then we did the first trainings for Anasazi. They'll never admit that. But yeah, we did majority of the trainings that were out there of the original programs. So that was our thing. I was never directly involved in rehab myself, but I was, you know, I tried to affect the programs. A lot of the original curriculum, this idea of circles and sand paintings and stuff like that, that was all me and David Holliday, and it's just been kind of, it's gone into almost all of the programs that are, at least in the Southwest here, kind of adopted that idea.
Who brought the jumping mouse story in?
That's been part of what we did at Boss for years and years and years, and I'm trying to think who really glommed onto that one. I don't know. It's been around. I don't know where the history of that one came from. But I know we used it early on at Boss.
Okay. And so early on, when you were training instructors, what was the gear like that you were using in the programs?
Well, I mean, I inherited that the gear that we started with. It came to me, and that's one of the things I asked Larry about years ago, is that where did these blanket packs come from? Because if you look at the literature that I'm looking at right now, which is classic camping, blankets were the way that you traveled, the way that you slept at nighttime, and they always talk about pairs of blankets. And a pair of blankets is not two blankets, it's one blanket that was two blankets long. So that when blankets were imported from Europe, they came in as one blanket, and then to pay duty on them. And then when they got here, they cut them in half and then sell them as two blankets, so they only paid duty on one blanket. So when you look at all the old literature talks about pairs of blankets and numbers of blankets and 5-pound blankets and that sort of stuff. And so I went back and started looking at how they were carrying them, and none of them talked about this idea of creating a roll and then folding your roll into a tuck, and then you have a jetpack. That came at Boss, or at BYU. And then we adopted it at Boss, and it's always been a part of what we do, this idea of folding a blanket in thirds, holding the pocket back, rolling it into the pocket. But somebody sent me an instructional sheet from the military from World War II that actually they were doing that. And so I think it was an old military skill that evolved into something that we were doing early on with the courses at BYU. But this idea of a blanket, sleeping in a blanket is an art form. And it's not just, the other thing too is that it's a little bit more communal when you're sleeping next to people, sharing blankets and that sort of thing. So to me, it has the style with which you camp has a direct effect on the outcome. You can't plug one piece of gear in for another and expect the outcome to be the same. It's not going to be the same. It changes how things happen. And so when blankets were part of what was going on, in order to teach us a kid how to sleep in a blanket, or a participant how to sleep in a blanket, and to be comfortable in a blanket over the long term, it took discipline. You just don't flop down on the ground and go to sleep. It takes practice, and it takes some technique. And to me, that technique is something that is a teaching thing as much as it is a learning thing. You learn the technique, but at the same time, the technique trains you. And so this idea of being disciplined enough to think ahead of time, to suffer consequences if you don't plan, are all realities that our culture today doesn't normally deal with. And to eliminate any opportunity for a participant to have to deal with consequences is a learning lesson that we miss. And so when I saw in the regulations that the state was saying, okay, no longer are blankets appropriate, that you go to sleeping bags, and to me the nature of the programs changed at that point. And I've been kind of watching them gradually move along as time goes on. But a lot of that has to do, once again, with knowing more and more about less and less. In other words, if you know why those lessons were taught and you know the technique behind them, then you can pass those traditions on, because the traditions don't become the reason for doing it, but they become important. But once you learn those, once you lose those traditions, I think the reason you lose them is because people just never knew what the context was to begin with. And so it's very easy for them to say, well, gee, a sleeping bag's easier than a blanket, let's just go to sleeping bags. But ease never was the reason for doing what we're doing. The lessons you learn along the way. So, to me, this idea of changing impacts of programs by changing the gear that you used and the context in which you use it is all very real. It's not just, yeah, we can substitute any modern piece of technology for anything that seemed traditional and get away with it, and you're going to get exact results through the change. That's not the case at all. You lose something in the process. I've always quoted a book that I read a number of years ago called The Axe Maker's Gift. And it talks about how when a piece of technology comes along, it comes along in a way that's so attractive that there's no way that you can help but adopt it. It's just there. It's like cell phones. I mean, you just have to do it now because that's where everybody is. The problem with it is that the adoption of that technology doesn't come free. That what you give up or what you pay for in adopting that technology is generally knowledge or technique. And that knowledge is valuable, and that knowledge is foundational. And once you adopt that new technology and you lose that knowledge and that tradition and that technique, it's very difficult to go back and recapture it. And so, but that's the trajectory that we're on as a culture today. New, and we constantly give up history and technique and knowledge that was very hard earned in the past. As a result, we're just starting to get on this trajectory of knowing more and more about less and less, and not thinking about the consequences that are going to happen if we have to back up. So, to me, the idea of primitive technology or classic gear goes back to this idea that these are foundational skills, that they have impact, that they affect not only you, but they affect your relationship with the environment. Because sleeping on the ground, using simple gear, does have environmental implications. The way you prepare your bedding and that kind of thing. And it has interpersonal implications. So to me, there's lots of lessons that I think we could learn just by maintaining a connection with traditional technology that we're not going to gain once we abandon that. All the other, I mean, if you look at programs in general, everybody else is doing the new tech thing. So you know, why jump on that bandwagon? The reason I think wilderness programs were so effective 20 years ago is because of the technology they were using. You know, there were real consequences, and kids had to learn those consequences, and a lot of it came from dealing with simple technologies. And once you abandon that for a better way, then I don't necessarily think that you're getting better results.
What do you think, besides the blanket pack, what were some of the other key skills that you taught in the early days that you thought were really critical?
Fire starting, you know, being able to build fires with bow drills or friction fires. Whether or not, I'm not even sure if that's part of the curriculum anymore or not. A lot of programs is probably an option now as opposed to an everyday technique. To me, there's a huge amount of learning that takes place there. Poncho shelters as opposed to tents and prefabricated shelters. What else? There's cooking on a fire as opposed to cooking on a stove. Simple rations as opposed to prepared rations. Foods that take cooking time as opposed to instant meals. Yeah.
What's the value of the cooking time?
The value of the cooking time?
Yeah. Versus instant.
Well, to me, part of it is social. This idea that gathering around a central hearth and working together as a team to solve a problem based on food takes a lot of social interaction. But the other thing too is, once again, this idea of discipline. That we're in a culture today that deals with instant problems and instant solutions, and most of the solutions are based on technology rather than stupid mistakes. And so, to me, that needs to be reversed. That we need to let people understand that the problems aren't instantaneous. Problems build. And if all of a sudden you create it, you're on the horns of a dilemma, and you're saying, "Oh, geez, that just happened to me." Well, no, it started way back here. And if you can get a kid to realize that these things are progressional, then that opens their eyes to the fact that, okay, I need to think ahead a little bit. And then the idea that, okay, I don't have to take responsibility for the fact that I didn't pay attention to the fact that I was getting myself into a pickle I can just bring in a piece of technology and that's going to solve my problem for me. What is that teaching anybody? And so if we go back to this idea that problems are yours, you need to face the consequences and figure it out. Well, when it comes to cooking, you need to pay attention to temperatures, you need to pay attention to where you are in the fire cycle as opposed to what's going to cook best at a specific point in time. You know, are you going to burn your ash cakes? Or are you going to scorch everything to the bottom of your pot? And if you do, then you deal with it. And I think we lose that when we substitute modern interventions.
So you're probably talking to a lot of people who have never made an ash cake before.
Probably so.
Okay. Could you just describe what it is to make an ash cake?
Well, I'm an ash cake bigot, and so when I teach ash cakes, it's pretty interesting because the students I have right now are students who have worked for a lot of rehab programs, and so they'll come back and they'll take my classes because they may have heard about something that I teach or something in the field, and then they have the opportunity to come back and sit with me in a field situation. So the way I teach ash cakes is the way I learned it, and when I learned it, it was a very precise way of doing it, to where when you finish mixing everything, you come out with hands that look just like that. They don't come out looking like you've got leprosy and you've got 10 pounds of dough stuck to your fingers. The way you do it is in a very precise way so that you don't waste material. So what I do, I'll open a bag of flour, create an indentation in it, pour in a little bit of salt, and then pour in just enough water to stir the dry flour into the water. And I'll just turn that and turn that and turn that until I'll have a ball the size of, say, a golf ball or something. And then I work that with a stick until I turn that inside out to where it starts picking up as much dry flour as possible. So when I pick that up, there's nothing that's going to stick to my fingers already. So I can work that into an ash cake or into a patty and then throw that on white ash. And that's the other thing too, is when do you cook an ash cake on a fire? And the best time is in the morning when you've got lots of white ashes and lots of burned down coals, because the white ash will work into the flour and can work as kind of a leavening and give you a little bit of a puffy sensation to your ash cake. So timing, technique, all of that has to do with this idea that you're creating something that is going to be something that's going to sustain you over the long haul, as opposed to just whipping up something, throwing it on the fire, and then eat something just because it fills a void. You know, there's some romance to it. There's some pride to it. There's some the better you do it, the better the reward and the taste and that sort of thing. So invest yourself.
Thanks for watching. Please like this video and subscribe. The Primitivus project is made possible by the generous sponsorship of Wingate Wilderness Therapy. To learn more, visit wingatewilderness.therapy.com.